Every person has a slot, and you may not find it right away. When you're born on this earth, and as you go through especially the early stages of life, there are certain attributes that you have based on genetics, based on the place you grew up in, so many variables. And a key point here, there are limits. Think about the smartest person you know, and think about the most attractive person you know. There's a good chance here that the smartest person you know isn't also the most attractive person you know. Now, that's not to say you can't have both, but time and time again, you'll find that a person who excels at one thing is giving up their attributes somewhere else. When you're looking for that slot to fill, each of these slots has a certain fitting attribute. Let's say this slot is someone who is a programmer. There are certain attributes that benefit you as a programmer. You would want something like intelligence, you would want perception, but you could sacrifice things like charisma, agility. Certainly, you could argue charisma has its benefits as a programmer as well. But I think if I was envisioning a perfect slot for a straight-up programmer, let's just call it a back-end programmer even, these are the attributes I would think are directly beneficial. And so whether you want to admit it or not, you have a certain attribute sheet. And I think it's very valuable as a person to accept and be aware of where you rank here. I know me personally, I am not at the highest level of strength. I think my luck is pretty good. Not that this is an attribute you can actually, well, okay, you can control luck. I have made a video on this in the past. Luck has its controllability. So I know based on my personal perception of my attributes, I do not fit into the back-end programmer. I could do it, absolutely, right? I've taken the time and looked at myself in the mirror and realized, hey, this is not for me. And so I do not try to fit my piece into this slot. And I think a lot of us try to do that. We try to form fit what we want us to feel. And some of us, we want to be back-end programmers perceptually, but deep down we know we do not fit into that slot. There are certain attributes attributed to this back-end programmer that we do not have. And so while we might fit in partially, right, we could fit the star partially inside of this, this triangle slot here. If you go on your whole life only partially fitting into the slot, you are sacrificing a lot of potential. And so why times it is not the slot that you want to be in right away. Right? Sometimes this takes time, and we may waste a lot of time doing this. For some people, this doesn't get found out until way later in life. Think about it. You're a person. You go through school. This right here is often where people make the wrong slot decisions. So many people went into CS and EE fields just because of the monetary benefits. They had no care about whether or not they actually fit into that position. Or perhaps their parents were lawyers or doctors. So many ways that you can mess up here. You go to school and guess what? Maybe you tried to fit into a slot you didn't belong in, right? Maybe you were a square trying to fit into a circle. And although it doesn't fit perfectly, you managed to get some part of yourself in there to where you could actually convincingly live a life that way. You live your career out. You spend time here. Sometimes people will spend 10 plus years here before they realize, hey, this isn't going anywhere that resonates. And you'll know this. The thing is you will realize this because of a few things. How do you know you're in the wrong slot? Number one, lack of motivation. Now, don't get me wrong, there will always be times in your life where you lack motivation, but these should be few and far between. And really, the recovery period should be very quick. It should be like a ball where it bounces off of the ground. If you find that there are long periods before finding your motivation again, that is a strong sign you are not in the right slot. Lack of progress. This is a big one. If you find that it's an uphill battle for you to accomplish anything at what you're doing, meanwhile, you're seeing other people absolutely speeding past you in every way, there is a good sign you are not in the right slot. These are the two key things that I look at and I think are great indicators of whether you're in the right position or not. And here's the thing, going back to what we said earlier, think about all the societal impacts that steer you into the wrong slot. Unfortunately, you have to accept one very real reality. The right slot may not actually be lucrative. I can tell you right now, there are people out there that are meant to do things based on the attributes that they have and the way they form fit, and they will never make as much as somebody else, right? Think about your chefs, think about authors, think about artists in general, really. Or think about programmers versus founders, CEOs. These positions, although there are opportunities to earn a lot, like absolutely there are chefs that earn a lot of money, but to enter into this position requires you to accept that it may not end up as lucrative. If I'm a circle trying to fit into a circle, this may be my best fit, but it may take a long time for this to see through to the end result. And it's common for people to end up in the right position, but then give up because they realize, oh, society's not going to like me here. I'm not making enough money. My parents are pressuring me, yada, yada. And so they force themselves to go into another position. You have to accept that. You have to accept that, hey, the chef slot is my correct slot, but I'm not likely to see any benefit from it for a very long time. Same goes with authors and also programmers and founders. This is a great example because really, truly, in your career, there are two paths you take, in corporate life even. The technical path and the management path. Everyone faces this question at some point in their life if you're working in tech for a long period of time. Some people will go the technical path, and so they'll stay as an individual contributor, and then others will go into the management path. I've seen it time and time again where the technical person, right, the person that really all of their attributes and interests line up to being a programmer, they attempt to force themselves into a management position. And what happens is they hate life and they suck at management. And so it brings their team down and it's just bad for everybody. But they did that because they thought, hey, right, maybe their wife is pressuring them. They're doing it for the extra money or the reduced layoff risk. And so the real battle that we have to face with everything we do, you need to look at yourself in the mirror for this, right? What are you truly good at? That is what decides which shape you fit in. How do you know it's the right slot? Kind of talked about how you know it's not the right slot, right? Lack of motivation, lack of progress. But how do you know you are going in the right direction? And I want you to think about the time when you became excited about something, deeply excited. So much so that it was the first thing on your mind in the morning. It got you up out of bed, it drove you throughout your day. Maybe eventually the novelty wore off, but I truly believe if you ever feel this way about something, it is a sign that there is some resemblance of the correct shape there. So let me give you an example. Let's say part of the early motivation you got was from programming. You started to learn new languages. Maybe you were learning Python, C++, whatever. It got you up out of the bed in the morning. You were thinking, oh, I can't wait to get better at this technology. So early on, it excited you because it was new. It was exciting. You were thinking of all the possibilities. But then time went on and you started to stagnate. You started to realize, hey, I kind of learned all I needed to learn, starting to reduce our excitement for the thing. To me, this is a sign that you were going in the right direction, but you didn't quite form fit it. So while programming might be a square, the shape that's meant for you may have been a rectangle. While programming in the early onset, gave you super extreme motivation and eventually died out, you were going in the right direction, but it wasn't quite the right fit. And so to find your right fit, you need to look at what caused this part here. What got you up out of bed in the morning? Maybe you thought it was programming that was exciting you, but really it was building. And so you try that and you think, okay, I'll focus on the building aspects. Okay, what do I want to build? And that gives you another motivating factor. But then again, it wears off. You start off programming, you were a square trying to fit into a rectangle. Maybe when you shifted to building an app, it became a little bit closer, right? It was a rectangle, but it wasn't quite the same width. And so you go a bit deeper. Okay, I clearly like building apps. I like building things. Maybe it's just not the right app. Go down this pathway and eventually you get to a point where you are just locked in on that thing and it never wears out. And this is where you know you're in the perfect shape. And I would go as far as to say it almost feels like when you're in the right shape, it truly almost feels impossible not to. I've had cases where I'm doing something and literally I cannot go a day without doing it. And I try to stop myself from doing it, but I can't. That is how you know you found something that really fits your shape. All the attributes are lined up, all the perks that you've been given in life, they line up just perfectly for you to do that thing and to do that thing well. And you know it. Your brain can't convince you otherwise.